Before I make the next introduction, Patrick Shear, can you stand up, please? He's also he was with our steering committee. He just left to take another job up in Indian River, but I wanted everybody to get a shout out to Patrick Shear, who has been helping us on a technical basis. And many other people have helped the steering committee. Also, Tiffany Troxter was a member of the steering committee. This is about all of you. So realize that all of you have an opportunity to become steering committee members. If you're interested, reach out to us at the throughout the summit. Now I'm here to introduce, absolutely. Now I'm here to introduce a friend and a collaborator, Hardeep Anand, currently serving as the Director of One Water Strategies, reporting directly to the mayor. He is recognized as a transformational executive and a thought leader in integrating water resource management. He led the execution of an approximately $7.5 billion multi-year infrastructure program in Miami-Dade County, which includes the implementation of an approximate $3 billion state mandate ocean outfall legislation. He leads the charge with a vision of shifting from a transactional approach to water planning to one that transforms the water system in the region. He has championed the One Water concept, advocated for water governance across watersheds, and a collaborative regulatory framework to prioritize water-related investments with the region for water infrastructure. Please welcome Hardeep.
Oh, my time is up. I had 15 minutes, by the way. I'm just kidding. Good morning, everyone. First and foremost, Albert, thank you for those kind words. And I think a shout out and let's give all of you a round of applause to really making it here. I think those little drops of water will make waves of action, right? So thank you for being here. I have a brief introduction, but like Suzanne said, every time I have to make a talk on a topic so critical, my mind does get cluttered, and it's not easy to kind of declutter these conversations. So my job today is the slides up? All right. So I lead up the conversations of what we call in the industry One Water. By show of hands, how many of you are familiar with the term One Water? All right, great. A few of us. And so one of my agendas today is hopefully to establish this brand of what One Water is all about. Next slide, please. I've got 3 goals. The first is obviously for us to have some conversations. I'm going to throw some trivia questions there, hopefully just make it fun. Educational for me to hopefully share what I know, but I'm here also to learn a lot from all the different conversations that are going to happen today. I said share what One Water is, and then hopefully leave you with some inspiration to become a part of this movement for the reasons which I'm going to share today. A little about myself. The next slide, please. I was born in Tanzania, East Africa. As you know, it's a coastal city. Tanzania is a coastal city. I spent a little time in London, England, and they're going through their own crisis with respect to the water side of it. I was raised in India, peninsula, again, water. Came to South Florida about 25 years ago, another peninsula surrounded by water, and then had a privilege to travel to so many different water-stressed countries or regions around the world. So I'm not sure if I'm chasing water or water's chasing me, but I thought that's a little fun fact about myself. The next slide, please. A quick trivia question. What's the source of drinking water in Miami-Dade County? You can shout it out. Next slide, please. I knew you would get this right. It's the Biscayne Bay, the Biscayne Aquifer. Of course, the bay is a very critical resource. Because of time, I'm not going to get into the details, but I just want to put that quick pictorial. Next slide speaks about where we are with Miami-Dade County, an urbanized region. Population continues to grow. That's a stress. We are a coastal community about 6.5 feet above sea level. The seagrass to a sawgrass ecosystem, a lot of conservation areas, and we all know we have a very porous, very unique geology, right? That makes us even more vulnerable. Next slide. We are surrounded by water. It's water, water, water all over, right? And obviously coastal flooding, tidal fluctuations, groundwater rise. We've got stormwater, we've got sea level rise, and then we've got assets which are obviously some stone throws, a spitting distance, as I say, from the coastline. Climate change, next slide, and sea level rise are escalating threats. And we know that climate change will be felt through the lens of water, and therefore it becomes critical to connect those two. On the next slide, you would see sunny day flooding. We know about that. And again, a nice warm sunny day, but we see a lot of tidal fluctuations. Is there a clicker? We make it easier. It's hiding somewhere. Oh, that is good. There it is. Thank you. Thank you. Sorry about that. Oh, okay. We talked about that. Do I have to point anywhere else? Where do I point? Okay, we talked about some of the flooding. All right. Next slide, please. I think this is challenging. All right. Well, we know that the sea level rise continues to increase, and we've been managing this from the 1870s, 12 inches of sea level rise since then. The trend line is up, and we call ourselves ground zero for obvious reasons, right? We've experienced all kinds of shocks and stresses in this region. Next slide. Now, in the context of resiliency, and when we talk about the bay is an equation in the overall context of our economy. From a resiliency standpoint, the definitions typically speak about shocks and stresses. We've got some over here. Climate change, we talked about. Aging infrastructure is important. Population growth continues to impact us. Cybersecurity is there. This is just a few of them. But we experienced the global pandemic. We are going to be confronted with emerging contaminants in the form of PFAS and microplastics and pharmaceuticals, right? Microplastics from all this stuff that you see over here. So obviously, from a resiliency standpoint, money starts playing a critical role, and we've got to find ways to be accelerating ourselves in front of these shocks and stresses. We're always playing catch up. So when you start putting these in the context of the big picture besides the bay, then the reality starts emerging. Next slide, please. We've seen these, more shocks and more stresses, from fish kills due to low oxygen to solid waste and toxins, from seaweed, sargassum, agricultural nutrient pollutions, and of course, repeated flooding. Next slide. Now, bring it back home, the two Bs, the Biscayne Bay and the Biscayne Aquifer. I really don't have to say this to anyone here. I think this is the reason why we are here, where we've seen miles of seagrass being eroded, contaminated waters have forced beach closings, disappearing coral sponges, and declining fish populations. Next slide. All right, one more trivia. Water is, thank you. Next slide. But water is life, but I'll take it a step further. It is life, but it's quality of life, it's health and it's quality of life, right? Because at the end of the day, your body is a 70% or plus water, and therefore it's important for us to recognize that. Next slide. Children, how many have children here? Next slide. How many plan to have children? Not me. All right, next slide. So here are some fun facts here that I think are critical. Next, please. 75% of the world's area is covered in water. That's 326 million trillion, 18 zeros behind 326. 97% of that is not drinkable. 2% of it is capped in glaciers or deep underground. It's 1% that is fit for human consumption. That's for about 7.8 billion people. Expected to become 10 billion people by the year 2050, competing for that 1%. In addition to the transportation sector, the housing sector, the schools, the hospitals, the airports, industry, manufacturing, name it, right? So obviously, bring it back to the second B, the Biscayne Bay, becomes critical in that context. And there's a reason why I'm kind of trying to elevate the conversations to a higher level, because we just don't live in a bubble here, right? 2 minutes. Next slide, please. We take water for granted. We know this. We expect water when we flush the toilets. We expect a nice warm shower. Next slide. But in reality, sometimes, I've worked in the infrastructure side, we take things for granted. This is a pipe that carries water, but we rarely think of it as a pipe carrying water, pipe carrying life. Next slide. Global water stress continues to increase. Next slide. The climate change, I said, will be felt through the lens of water. We've seen this in Africa and Cape Town, where there were riots. Next. We've seen this in Australia with droughts and famine, again with water. We saw this in Chennai in Asia. This is the crisis around the world. Next. In North America, back home, we know this very well. Next. Chile, the lake itself has completely dried. Europe, England is facing its own problems. Next. So water scarcity is the biggest challenge. These are some factoids here. I'm not going to bore you with this because I've got a few more slides to cover, but let's move on. Suzanne talked about the bees. I'm going to talk about how things are all connected. Next time you throw the avocado away, think about how much water you've thrown away, right? It takes a lot of water to sustain life. And it's about food security we're talking about. So I hope you start seeing the connectivities of how the water ecosystems are all connected. Next. She talked about the bees. Bees are needed for pollination. We talked about livestock. Livestock is again connected to food security. Next, please. Then there's a water health nexus. There's a water life nexus. It's not just food and water. It's human health. It's human resilience. Next, please. So again, we are all connected through water. Move on, please. So what is One Water? I have 30 seconds. I wanted to give you this connection, but hopefully I'll get another minute or so. Let's move on, please. This is the definition. There are 6 different silos. It's not just about water. It connects utilities. It connects cities. It connects businesses. It connects agriculture. It connects social and economic inclusion. It connects healthy waterways. This is how it all comes together. At the end of the day, when you start talking about economic security and food security and health security and water security, this is where that One Water definition comes in. We still don't have a framework nationally. We're going to be working in this direction. The mayor had the fortitude and the vision to get this done. She's been a champion. I've been nominated. I can't do it alone. I think it'll take an army of us to get this all accomplished. So there's a lot happening in the coming months. Next slide, please. The journey starts with a drop of water. On the right side, you see the water cycle. This is how it all comes together. It is that drop of water that becomes groundwater and surface water and canal water and aquifer water and storm water, and give it any other name. We regulate it as such for good reasons. But at the end of the day, I think it needs to all come together. Next. One Water resilience is all about the definitions. My favorite definition is the one by the 100 resilient cities, where we need to be able to recover, to rebound, to restore services in the aftermath of a disruptor, in the aftermath of a storm. Next slide, please. What does it take to become resilient? One crucial step, governance. Everyone is going to be talking about it. So let's quickly see what it is all about. This is the catchment. This is how all these systems come together. I don't have the time to get into this. This is a presentation of its own, but I wanted you to see how everything connects. The Bay connects the 34 cities. We're only as resilient as the weakest link in the chain. We cannot be resilient as just one little ecosystem, right? Because you're only as strong as the weakest link. It's somewhere in the slides. Next slide, please. I said this. Next. We were part of this ecosystem, 100 RC. We were one of the 5 countries around the globe selected. We did some great work. Next slide. When we started mapping governance, this is how it looked. This is how complicated it looked in terms of the touch points. And when we start go to the next slide, please. We started decluttering it. You see how different players, from the EPA and the local and the federal agencies all come together, a complicated ecosystem. We need to get this act governed so that we can all collaborate and work together, put our resources together, make sure that the policies, the frameworks are all developed so that we are not operating in any of these silos, including financial resources. Next. What doesn't get measured doesn't get managed. When we start talking about resiliency, the question is, how resilient are we? So we had a lot of work behind the scenes that were done. We started with 1,500 different indicators. We whittled them down to 4 dimensions, 12 goals and objectives, because it's critical from a standpoint of fiduciary responsibility for those of us who work in government. The mayor talked about the scorecard. And there's a lot of work that goes behind it in terms of data gathering. And because data is the one that actually then unifies the story, right? Because we can have a bunch of subjective conversations. How do we unify it? Next, please. This is how it all comes together: data silos, decision-making, information, insight, and scorecarding and reporting. Next slide, please. I'm going to skip this slide. It's social, economic, political, environmental. It's all about governance, but let's move on. What, 3 more slides, I think. Again, conversations have to be local, but we have to align ourselves with obviously things that are happening at the national, international levels. Next. Let's move this on. All right. Resiliency is a journey. We will never, ever be in a position to say we are resilient, because it's an ongoing process, right? And I think as citizens, I think we need to come to terms with it. The global pandemic was something that no one thought about it. It has become an equation. We're still adapting to it. There will be others tomorrow. PFAS is going to get regulated. We have to start devoting and dedicating financial resources and research behind it. There's a lot of work happening there. So I think the whole goal is about continuing to be into that framework and the thought process of continuous improvement. Next. The strategies and solutions are many. Next, please. This is where the One Water perspective comes again. I'm bringing it back because next, you can skip the next 5 slides, please, because these are some actions we're going to be working on. That keep skipping them. I wanted to show you that, these are frameworks that are happening, but we've not got enough time. Anyway, this is my last slide, right? No matter the approach, changing the way people and organizations interact with water to repurpose what was once considered as waste requires a fundamental shift in thinking. We've got to start looking at our policies, our frameworks, our regulations. We've got to start regulating the upgraded regulations, right? Because that is where I think things start becoming real. It'll start with One Water. I've got a lofty goal in front of me. I'm going to be relying on a lot of you to help me doing that. Next slide, please. And I think the last point I want to make is whatever we do, when we start talking about resiliency, it's always critical for us to align our actions with others, right? The mayor has all these strategies, the sea level rise strategy, the climate action strategy, septic to sewer strategies. The 34 cities have to align in terms of policy, in terms of infrastructure with the mayor's strategies. Our strategies have to align with national and international goals. So next time around, there'll be a trivia question on these 17 SDGs. Thank you so much. And I'm sorry I had to skip through.